Hi, my name is Dr. Emily Wilson, and I am so glad that you're joining me for this masterclass today. The masterclass is called Lower Your Stress Hormones Naturally. And this is a super important topic because stress is so pervasive in our culture, so much so that it has become my clinical focus and I see profound changes happen in people's lives. And so I've really dedicated myself in my career to helping women reverse the health effects of chronic stress and adrenal fatigue. Now, if you've never heard of adrenal fatigue, don't worry, we're going to cover it in today's class because adrenal fatigue is something that is a condition that we can develop if we are living with chronic stress. So that said, let's dive into class. This is a little something that my lawyer makes me tell people. This class is for educational purposes. We are not diagnosing, treating, or providing any medical advice today, but I do hope you get a lot out of it. Okay, so who am I and why am I even talking about this? My name is Dr. Emily Wilson, and I am a naturopathic doctor and an acupuncturist, and I'm currently practicing in Prescott, Arizona, and virtually. And I founded a couple of companies. I founded Sanos Skincare and Sanos Anti-Aging Medicine. And in this year, actually in 2021, I combined the two to create Sanos Wellness. Because what I wanted to do was create something that was even more comprehensive than just a medical practice where I can help certain people, my patients, but I can't necessarily help everyone. I really wanted to share as much information as I could with women to help empower them and help them heal from the health effects of chronic stress and adrenal fatigue, because these health effects are a huge problem for women. They're a really big deal, and it's absolutely something that we can avoid, that's preventable, and that's treatable. So I'll tell you a little bit too about my healing journey, because that really has informed my practice and how I work with women. As I mentioned, this year I created Sanos Wellness, which is a products and services marketplace currently online. And then I do have a physical practice in Arizona. And our mission is to help women reverse the health effects of chronic stress and adrenal fatigue. And I do offer products, services, and education around just how to do that. So let's start. Let's kind of look big picture at this whole issue, 30,000 feet, stress. What is stress? Stress is it's an experience that we have that has direct physical effects on our bodies, all over our bodies. Now we think of stress as being stressed out. Maybe you get a little tight, you get a little tense, you get a little irritable. Stress can actually manifest all over our bodies. And we'll talk a lot about how that can happen and where it shows up. But for now, I just really want you to understand big picture. Stress is going to affect every single aspect of your life, every single aspect of your health. And here's the big thing that I want to tell you too. Stress is not just, mental or emotional. Stress will absolutely manifest in your body in a lot of different ways. And so we look here, we can see that the effects of stress, as I mentioned, they manifest all over the body. And we'll go through a lot of some lists around this, but I just want you to think big picture. Your digestion is affected, your mental health is affected, your sleep is affected, your reproductive health is affected big time. Another thing that's really affected that people don't always take into consideration is our relationships. So that can look like libido issues that affect your intimacy with your partner. It can look like stress and strain between you and your partner for other reasons, stress and strain with parents, with children, with loved ones, with friends, with siblings. It can happen in any one of our relationships, because when we are living with chronic stress, we are robbed of our energy and our vitality. And so we don't have the capacity to be present in our relationships, which is really devastating. Now, again, with this idea that stress is not just an emotional experience. So it's not just like, you go out into traffic, the guy in front of you was driving like a crazy person, and that's totally stressing you out because you have somewhere you need to be in 5 minutes. That's absolutely a stressor, and it will absolutely affect your stress hormone levels. But there are other types of stresses too that we really need to become conscious of. A big physical stressor is actually inflammation. So when we're living with chronic inflammation, our bodies feel that. And it can manifest. Chronic inflammation, the symptoms are usually silent, but they can manifest in some ways. Digestive issues is a big one. Pains, like aches and pains, is another big one. You can also have many other symptoms like headaches, brain fog is another big one. So the symptoms of chronic inflammation are usually quite silent, although there are certain things we can pick up on. Now, if we don't address chronic inflammation, it can turn into some of the diseases that are mentioned on this slide, and we're not really going to talk about that today, but what we are going to talk about is reducing chronic inflammation. Why are we going to talk about that? Because our adrenal glands, which are the glands in our bodies that secrete stress hormones, they will respond to chronic inflammation. When they get the signal in our bodies that something is inflamed, that there's an inflammatory process going on, our adrenal glands will secrete stress hormones in order to try to manage that inflammation. Why? Because stress hormones actually have an anti-inflammatory capacity, specifically cortisol. We'll talk more about that, but big picture, stress hormones are secreted in the presence of chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation is a chronic physical stressor. So if we're going to talk about reducing stress and reducing healing adrenal fatigue, we cannot do that without addressing inflammatory levels inside of our bodies. Now, there are a lot of potential physical stressors. I mentioned chronic inflammation, but what causes chronic inflammation? In this slide, I just wanted to introduce some of the things that can cause chronic inflammation and drive this process and, participate in our body feeling, chronically stressed and the development of adrenal fatigue. Poor diet, that's a huge one. Food is medicine, and it can either heal us or harm us. So if we're eating a low quality diet, our body will feel that and we will become inflamed. A lot of inflammation happens at the level of our digestive system. Pollution, when we're exposed to pollution, to pesticides, to chemicals that we shouldn't have around us, our bodies will take them in, and those chemicals will actually damage our cells. What happens when our cells get damaged? Inflammation. And excess of toxic substances. Drinking too much alcohol, using drugs, or smoking, or using an excessive amount of tobacco can also cause inflammation. I don't think that's much of a surprise to any of us. Metabolic disruptors. Now, what are these? There are a lot of, there's a subset of chemicals in our environment that, not only are they bad for us, but they're actually specifically damaging to our hormonal system. And we want to minimize our exposure to those as much as possible. So things like plastics, a lot of the typical cleaning supplies that you would have in your home are all full of endocrine disruptors or chemicals that will specifically damage your hormonal system. I always tell people, walk down the aisle in the grocery store that has all the cleaners that might have, the detergents, the cleaners, the spray cleaners, the bathroom cleaners, all that stuff. Walk down that aisle, the laundry detergents, and smell. The smell you smell is the smell of endocrine disruptors. You don't want to use those products. You want to use something much more clean and much more natural, because the chronic exposure to those will cause inflammation. Finally, another cause of chronic inflammation is overexertion. And that can look like physical or mental or emotional overexertion. Now, I mentioned, I'm going to move this guy down for you a little bit if I can. Oh, no. Okay, I guess I can't. We are absolutely going to be talking about stress hormones today. Stress hormones are the chemicals that are secreted when our body is under stress. And there is a very intimate connection between our adrenal glands, which are the glands that secrete stress hormones, and our brain. In fact, they're very, very intimately wired. Why is that? Because usually our brain is the first organ that recognizes a stressful situation and responds to it. And this came about evolutionarily because thousands of years ago, our world looked very different. We didn't have the stressors that we have today, but what we did have was things like tigers. And so when our brain would register a predator like a tiger, it would go into a stress response, because what the stress response was built to do was to recognize danger and shift our physiology so that we could get ourselves out of danger. It was activating the fight or flight response. In order to survive, we would either need to fight or we would need to run. And so the stress response actually did evolve, with the best of intentions for us. It's definitely a survival mechanism. Now, the problem is that these days we don't have, most of us aren't exposed to stressors like tigers or other major human predators. In fact, what we have is a life and days full of stresses like traffic, relationships, jobs, families, people, keeping the house clean, cooking the meals. All of these things are also stressors. So rather than having one big, activation of the stress response from a predator and then being able to return to a calm state, now we are constantly being triggered. We are constantly activating our fight or flight response. And the reason I wanted to share this image in the center with you is because this really illustrates the adrenal brain connection to me. I mentioned a couple of times now that the adrenal glands in the brain are very closely wired, and they are. And here's what happens. When our brain recognizes some kind of a stressor, whether it's the guy in front of you driving like a crazy person or a tiger, that's usually registered with our eyes first, which send a message back to the limbic system in our brain. Specifically, what we see here is the hypothalamus, and then that activates the call to action to the adrenal glands. So it basically activates, it sends a message down to the adrenal glands that there's danger. We need stress hormones now, because again, the stress hormones are there to shift our physiology to get us into fight or flight so that we can run away from or fight for survival. And there's what we see is the adrenal glands will secrete stress hormones. Cortisol is one of them. It's listed on this image here. But the adrenal glands secrete these stress hormones that then feed back up to the brain. And so this is the loop that happens: brain, adrenals, brain, adrenals, brain, adrenals. They're always talking to each other. So big picture, in this setting, the adrenal glands in the brain are very closely wired. In the setting of stress, that connection is activated to produce stress hormones. So what are our stress hormones? The big ones, there are quite a few. There are a couple families. The big ones are cortisol and adrenaline. And cortisol, they both have a lot of different functions, and they both function a little bit differently. The adrenaline, think of that as the immediate response. So that's the one that's going to raise your blood pressure. It's going to make you start breathing more shallowly. It's going to start, it's going to make you tense and on edge so that your body's ready to either run or fight. Then we have cortisol, which is a little bit different. Cortisol has a more long-term effect on the body. And so we see with cortisol is there to kind of, we don't know how long the fight's going to last. We don't know how long we're going to have to run. And so cortisol is there to shift our metabolism to provide a more long-term source of energy in case we do have to fight or run for a while. So cortisol has effects on blood sugar. It has effects on our metabolism. It has effects on our weight and our weight set point. It is actually an anti-inflammatory hormone. That's why when people have autoimmune conditions or some kind of inflammatory condition, they'll be given a cortisone cream. Cortisone is in the cortisol family. Cortisol also has strong effects on the brain. And when we live with chronic stress, we do actually see changes in brain structure and brain function. Now, I wanted to show this chart on the right-hand side of your slide here because cortisol naturally is a hormone that fluctuates, and its level fluctuates throughout the day. And when we're healthy, our cortisol level is highest in the morning and lowest in the evening. And you can see a healthy, cortisol curve would be outlined. If you look at the green stripe in the center of that chart, that's really where we see the healthiest curve of cortisol would be right in that green line there. Cortisol, when we're healthy, it's high in the morning. That's what gets us out of bed. That's what wakes us up. And then throughout the day, it starts to lower. And when cortisol dips down to its lowest level in the evening, that's what helps us fall asleep. Now, when we are living with chronic stress, initially what we see is cortisol levels go higher. So you can see this person, for example, has taken 4 samples throughout the day. There are 4 little white dots on this chart. And this person is actually has elevated chronic stress levels, chronic stress hormones. So their cortisol level is high throughout the day, higher than it should be. So this person is clearly living a stressful life. Their stress level is elevated, especially throughout the day. So those are our main stress hormones. So when we talk about high stress hormones, we're thinking mostly of cortisol and then, of course, adrenaline. Adrenaline levels will fluctuate a lot more than cortisol. So we do, when we're working with with reversing the health effects of chronic stress, we need to look at cortisol levels. Okay, this is probably no surprise at this point, but chronically high stress hormones are bad for us. I have mentioned that when we have chronically high cortisol levels, it will actually alter the way our brain functions, and it will alter brain structure as well. And we've seen this time and time again. Multiple research studies have shown that cortisol will objectively change the way that our brain looks and the way our brain works. But not only that, stress hormones have effects on every single area of our life and every single part of our body. So when we are living with chronically high stress hormones, we see changes everywhere. We see changes in the brain, as I mentioned, changes in metabolism and our metabolic rate. And that can look like that persistent weight gain, especially for those of us that struggle with losing belly fat. That's cortisol right there. And if you're somebody who has gained a lot of weight that's really hard to lose, what I do with these patients is we do full hormone panel, because I want to know not only what your adrenal hormones look like, but I want to know what your thyroid looks like. I want to know what your female hormones look like and what your male hormones look like. And so that's estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So we need to look at that family of hormones as well. And with that comes chronic fatigue, low energy, dragging yourself through your day, brain fog, sleep issues. A lot of times women will be what's called wired but tired. So they're tired all day long, dragging themselves through their day. But the second their head hits the pillow, boom, their mind goes into overdrive. And all of a sudden they're thinking, and they're not even trying to, they can't really control it, but the thoughts are keeping them up. So that's the wired but tired syndrome that we see a lot of times with chronic stress and then with adrenal fatigue. A lot of times women have libido issues. There may be reproductive issues, things like infertility, menstrual changes. We see a lot of changes in mood and mental health. We will see changes in our cardiovascular health, changes in Again, this is something that we're not talking about enough in our current medical model, but changes in our relationships. And that's not just relationships with other people, but also relationships with ourselves. Because when we're living with chronic stress, we are living basically outside of max capacity. And so we don't have the time, the energy, or the reserves to take care of ourselves. We don't have the time, the energy, or the reserves to show up in our relationships, which are some of the most important in our lives. We just lack the ability to be able to be fully present for them. And what that is a loss of life. That's stress stealing your life from you. And I think that is absolutely the worst thing that can happen to us. And our happiness is every bit as important in our health as our physical well-being. So again, that's why I have made this my mission to help women reverse the effects of chronic stress and adrenal fatigue, because we all deserve a happy, healthy life. Now, I've mentioned this term a few times, adrenal fatigue. And adrenal fatigue is a condition, we'll go through it, but it's basically what happens when we live long enough in a period with high stress hormones. We can develop what's called adrenal fatigue. Now, I mentioned the adrenal brain connection, which you see again here. And what happens is that this loop is overactivated for a long enough period of time. And I'll show you what that looks like. So what is adrenal fatigue? I always tell people, think of it as a crisis. Adrenal fatigue is a crisis in women's health. And that's because it comes from a long period of time of living for other people at the expense of ourselves. And it's absolutely a condition that manifests not only in our bodies, but also in our minds and our emotional health. And then even for a lot of women in what they would say is their spiritual health. So what is adrenal fatigue? Now, adrenal fatigue is a condition that's recognized in functional medicine, which is what I practice. It's root cause medicine. I'm a naturopathic doctor, so I'm always looking for what's really going on. We're not trying to treat the symptoms. What we're doing is trying to understand where the symptoms come from and dial back to what's actually causing the symptoms. So adrenal fatigue is a condition that's recognized in functional medicine as an imbalance. There's an imbalance in the way that our body is working. We want, the way that we work with that, the way that we treat that is by restoring balance to the body. Now, I've mentioned that adrenal fatigue is caused when we are living with chronically elevated stress hormone levels. And those stress hormones can be coming from physical, mental, emotional stressors. Quite often they're coming from all three. And when we recognize adrenal fatigue, we want to stop the process. We want to reverse it and restore balance right away, because the cost of living with a functional medicine condition like adrenal fatigue can be your health down the road, because it can certainly cause a more serious or more complicated illness. Now, our adrenal glands, our body is amazing and our body is wise. And our adrenal glands are meant to be able to regenerate with proper care. And this is the big distinction. This is what I always tell people. So while adrenal fatigue is not technically recognized in Western or allopathic medicine, your primary care doctor is not going to diagnose you with adrenal fatigue. There is a condition called Addison's disease, which is actually a recognized disease state. It's an autoimmune condition, and that is very, very serious and very important that you do seek the proper medical care from an endocrinologist and a team of doctors, because that can certainly cause a medical emergency. That's the distinction there. Adrenal fatigue is not Addison's disease. So I always like to let people know that. Now, what is adrenal fatigue? I love these images because I think that they do a really beautiful job of describing the difference between the way that we look at health and disease from a functional medicine perspective versus the way that we look at health and disease from an allopathic or Western model. Now, if you look at the square in the top right-hand side, I'm sorry, it's a little bit cut off there, but that big green box says health. It has the word health in it. And then you see the smaller red box inside of it, and that says disease. Now, in our current Western medical model, for example, if you go to your primary care, you can tell them, okay, I'm not feeling well. I have all this stuff going on. And they might do a physical exam, they might not, and they'll probably run some labs. Because what do they want to do? They want to see, okay, do your labs tell me that you are quote unquote healthy, or do they tell me that you are quote unquote diseased? What side of the line do you fall into? Which box do you fall into? Based on your labs, usually is what they're looking at. And so I've heard this time and time again from women, and it really just drives me absolutely insane, because it's one of the worst things that we can do to people who are genuinely seeking help. But what often happens is a woman will say, she'll go to her doctor, she'll say, I'm not feeling well, I'm exhausted all day, I can't sleep, I've gained this weight I can't lose. My digestion is all over the place. I have no libido. I'm not connecting with people. I'm just not happy. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. And so they'll run some labs and they'll say, well, hey, everything looks normal. You're healthy. There's nothing wrong with you. It must be in your head, or it's all in your head. And that drives me absolutely insane, because it's not in her head. It's absolutely something that's going on. There's something going on in her body that's driving this experience that she's having, and she's trying to figure it out. But unfortunately, when women hear this and they internalize it, it puts them in a state of powerlessness. It makes them feel like they're at fault. They have done something wrong, and all they need to do is quote unquote snap out of it. At this point, quite often as well, women are offered an antidepressant, which usually doesn't help at all, because the issue is not with the root of the issue is not, a chemical imbalance in their brain. And so I'm always so grateful when these women continue to look for answers, because in functional medicine, we actually do have a lot of answers for her. And so that's why if we shift our focus to this square on the lower left-hand side of the slide, you see what we have is still that big green box that says health. We still have that little red box in the middle that says disease. And what we have in between the two is that purple box, the functional imbalance. And what this means is, when we look at a woman, from the functional medicine perspective, she comes into our office and she says, I'm exhausted, I'm not sleeping, I have no libido, I'm not digesting, I can't lose this weight I've gained, I'm unhappy, I'm depressed all the time. We do a thorough health history, so I want to know everything she's been through. I'll look at any labs she brings in. We'll usually run functional medicine labs. Like I said, I like to look at everything: adrenals, thyroid, female hormones. We're also going to do some blood work. And usually what we find is, not that has a quote unquote disease, but that there is something out of balance here. And that imbalance is driving the way that she feels. And so once we know that, we can help her by creating an individualized treatment plan just for her, that's designed to move her back into a state of balance and health. And that's why I love doing what I do, because this type of medicine is so empowering for women, because all of a sudden they realize, oh my God, it wasn't just me. I'm not the problem. It's that something else has been going on. So what is adrenal fatigue? Please don't let this slide make you feel overwhelmed. Basically, adrenal fatigue, here's the big picture. Adrenal fatigue manifests all over our bodies. And so we can see symptoms in every single part of our bodies. And that's why when you think about what are the signs and symptoms of adrenal fatigue, it depends on a couple of things. It depends on, which systems in your bodies you're feeling it the most. Are you feeling super brain fog? Are you having digestive issues? Are you not sleeping? Are you having metabolic issues and can't lose the weight that you've put on? So it can depend on where they show up in your body. It also depends on how long you've been under chronic stress, because symptoms for adrenal fatigue change over time. As the adrenal fatigue gets worse and worse, the symptom picture changes. Now, there are also a lot of symptom crossovers with conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, PTSD, and metabolic syndrome, as well as many autoimmune conditions. And these are all things that a lot of doctors get really stumped on because they don't know what to offer patients outside of a pretty narrow kit of medications. And that's why, again, functional medicine comes in so much handy because we have a lot of resources to offer people. Now, we'll just run through the list of symptoms really quickly. But again, the big picture is that adrenal fatigue manifests all over the body, and it really changes a woman's entire experience of her life. So she can have daytime fatigue, no energy at all, or she might energy levels might fluctuate throughout the day, depending on how long she's been living with this. She can have insomnia or sleep issues. I've mentioned a couple times that persistent weight gain, especially that weight gain around the belly, that belly fat that just won't go away. She can have brain fog, digestive issues, mood imbalances like depression and anxiety. She might cycle through them. Even apathy is a huge sign of adrenal fatigue. Blood sugar issues. Blood sugar can be too high, can be too low, and it can also fluctuate throughout the day, causing a lot of discomfort and a lot of mood issues. Appetite changes. She might either see increased appetite or decreased appetite. And we usually see a lot of cravings for sugar, carbs, and salt. Changes in blood pressure could be high, could be low, could fluctuate. We see a lot of pain show up and weakness in the body. So joint pains, muscle pains, headaches, getting really tired after a simple activity like walking for a short distance. She may have a low libido. She may have no libido at all. Fertility issues can be caused by adrenal fatigue, menstrual changes. If a woman has already gone through menopause, she may feel the effects of low hormone levels even more strongly than she would if she were not living with adrenal fatigue. So adrenal fatigue has a lot of, it will do a lot to affect our hormone levels in other areas of our bodies. That's thyroid, female hormones, and male hormones too. That's why I like to test them all when I work with patients. Now, I mentioned this before, adrenal fatigue is a crisis in women's health, and I firmly believe that because, this actually came from my own healing journey, which I'll share with you in just a minute. But adrenal fatigue is a crisis in women's health because it's the manifestation of a life that's lived for other people for outside demands. It's what happens when we make everything outside of ourselves more important than ourselves. Because again, as women, we have so many demands placed on our energy, so many demands placed on our time now. And that's everything from career, from trying to get projects done, from emails, traffic, being a good mother, a good partner, a good wife, a good daughter, a good sister, a good friend. We have all of these things that we really genuinely want to excel at in our lives. And so we try and give 100% to everything. But the problem is we can't. And unfortunately, what's usually sacrificed is our relationship with ourselves and our health and our self-care. So again, adrenal fatigue is the manifestation of us living a life for other people rather than living a life for ourselves. So my story. This is me in 2016. I was living in Seattle at the time, and I came down to Arizona to visit family. And I came down with two of my really good friends from school, from medical school, and we went to the Grand Canyon. And this is so significant to me for a couple reasons. But at this point, I was really suffering. You can't really tell in the picture, but I had gained about 30 pounds. I was exhausted all day. I was so depressed, but I was cycling from depression and anxiety through depression and anxiety. Sleep was like crazy. I wasn't digesting my food. I was constantly feeling sick. The level of hopelessness that I felt was overwhelming. And here's the thing, as a naturopathic doctor, I knew exactly what I would need to do to take care of myself, and so I would do the diet, I would do the lifestyle pieces, and I would do really well for a while. But eventually, life would happen and I would, as I say, I would fall off the wagon. And when I did that, I would get so far down into the guilt and shame spiral that I would not be able to get back to my healthcare plan. And so I would go back to living with, skipping the meals and eating the quick foods and coffee in the morning and wine at night, and really just putting my own health and my own happiness on the back burner in order to try and show up for everyone else in my life. And I remember looking out at my life and I was like, my patients are all getting such amazing results. What is the difference? What is going on for me that is different than what's going on for them? And I had this moment, I'll never forget it. I was sitting on the couch one day and I was just totally done. I felt 100% empty. I was exhausted. I was super depressed. Again, 30 pounds overweight. I just felt hopeless. I felt like, where do I go from here? I can't keep living like this. And at that point, I knew something was missing because, again, my patients were getting great results, but I wasn't really able to do that for myself. Instead, I was cycling through the healthy changes and then falling back into, less than healthy habits, a lot of which were driven by feeling guilty and feeling shame for not being able to take care of myself with 100% perfection. And so that question opened up a door for me in my mind, and I started to really think about, what is missing for me? What am I missing? And I remember I was on a walk and it came to me. And so I'm going to show you the next slide because I think this is really where we find the answer. What I realized when I was on that walk was that what was missing for me was valuing myself, was a feeling of self-worth, because I was living from a place where I was working so hard on taking care of everyone else that I valued their healthcare more than I valued my own. Now, as a doctor, I take my patients' health and wellness extremely seriously, but what I realized that day was that I can't do it at the expense of myself. And so that's why I say that adrenal fatigue is a crisis in women's health, because adrenal fatigue, the way that I felt that day, that for that period of my life, that's the manifestation of living more for other people than we're living for ourselves. And when I realized that what I needed to do was take my own health and wellness seriously, because nobody else was going to take it more seriously than I was, that is when everything started to change. The diet changes became easy. The lifestyle changes became easy. The weight started dropping off. And I'm convinced that what happened was, when I became happier, when I became more self-assured, and when I started living for myself rather than for everyone else, my stress hormone levels started to just naturally lower to a more healthy level. And I know this is the case because I was testing them. And that, again, is why I love functional medicine testing, because we can have your subjective experience, and we can match it up with the subjective data and really see what's going on. But again, to talk big picture here, women's health is missing a vital component. That component is the self-worth piece. And we're not really going to heal unless we are living from a place of self-worth. And so a lot of the women that I see are women who have tried the dietary changes, they've tried the lifestyle changes, they've seen other practitioners, and they're just not getting any results. And it's 100% of the time, well, I guess I can't say that, but I can say 99.9% of the time, it's because their relationship with themselves is off. And what we need to do is start by building up a foundation of self-worth, because when she knows that she's worthy without a shadow of a doubt, that's when everything changes. And that's when I get goosebumps. That's why I love doing what I do. So let's talk a little bit more. What I'm going to do right now really quickly is give you just a quick 30,000 foot view of what we've already covered. And then we're going to talk about how can we naturally reduce our stress hormones. Now, if you remember, stress can be physical, can be mental, can be emotional. But what stress does is raise our stress hormones. And when our stress hormones are chronically elevated, we have symptoms of that all over our body. If our stress hormones are high for long enough, then then a person moves into what's called adrenal fatigue, which is a functional medicine state of imbalance. And what we need to do is restore balance. Now, when women are living from a state of chronic stress and adrenal fatigue, and they're trying everything they can to feel better, but nothing's working, it's because they haven't changed to start living from a place of self-worth. And so what we need to do is build up that foundation of self-worth first. And that's when everything starts to change. What I'd love to do now is give you a few concrete ideas and ways to actually work with reducing stress hormones and reversing adrenal fatigue. And I have my little hint here, the mind-body connection is everything. And that is 100% true. We're not just working on the body, we are working on who you are as a person. So the first key, reduce stress. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, stress can be physical, can be mental, can be emotional. And there are a lot of toxicities and toxins that can increase stress too. So physical stress, toxic substances, toxic habits, the eating while driving, the driving, being chronically late and having to drive like a crazy person or having crazy people around you when you're driving. We talked about the chronic inflammation being a source of chronic stress. And there are ways to reduce chronic inflammation. I'll tell you a little bit about that too. We want to reduce mental stress. And so we're reducing toxic thoughts, we're reducing toxic beliefs, because when we get those negative self-worth beliefs out of our minds, when we reduce the negative self-talk that we have, that's when we really open up a woman's internal landscape for change. We also want to reduce emotional stress. So that's toxic relationships, toxic patterns. If you're in a situation where maybe you're sharing some intimate relationship with a narcissist, or you're in a relationship with anyone, whether it's a friendship, a relationship with a family member, where you're being gaslighted or you're constantly being made to feel wrong or not good enough, that's a problem. And that's a major source of stress. And that's something else that really needs to be addressed in order for you to actually reclaim your health and your life. I say this all the time to women. Remember, you are far too precious to sacrifice your health and your happiness one more day. The second key, reducing inflammation. We've talked about how chronic inflammation is a chronic stressor on our adrenal glands. So we want to reduce inflammation. And how do we do that? There are a lot of ways. We need to figure out what in your life is causing the chronic inflammation. For a lot of us, it's diet. And so food is huge in reducing inflammation. We also want to make sure that we're cleaning up not only our diet, but also, other areas of our lifestyle. So are we using clean house cleaning products? Are we using clean bath and body products? Are we not drinking out of the plastic anymore? Are we, cleaning up our habits as far as alcohol, tobacco, as much as we can? So there are a lot of ways to reduce inflammation, and that's why I think it's so important that my patients and I always start with a long intake, because I want to know what's going on in their lifestyles, so we know where to start by reducing inflammatory agents in their life. The third key, put yourself first. And for a lot of women, this is really challenging. It can be actually really triggering, because women think, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I have all these people in my life. I can't put myself first. And I'm not saying, ignore them or make them less important or anything. I'm just saying, make yourself more important. The reason you've gotten to where you are in your life is that you've put yourself last for a really long time. What you need to do in order to heal, especially if you're someone who has tried a lot of things and nothing's worked, is change how you view yourself and change how you value yourself. And that really starts with connecting with your sense of self-worth. And as I've said, you want to stop sacrificing your health and your happiness. Your life is far too important. Your health and your happiness are far too important to keep giving them away to other people. And this, again, this is where the magic happens, especially for those women who've struggled with making any kind of change in their health. So to finish up my story, I know that I told you, I shared with you that photo of myself and my friends in the Grand Canyon in 2016, and how I was really struggling at that time. And that kind of set off my healing journey and healing from adrenal fatigue. And I have this image for you because last year in 2020 was the first time that I did the Rim to Rim hike. And this is, I did it again this year, which was also amazing. But this photo was taken in 2020 and I was climbing up out of the canyon. I had started, you can see on the horizon over there, all the way at the other side there. And in one day walked all the way to the other side. And the reason I share this is because at this point, this was 4 years after almost, I'd say 4 years and 3 weeks after that first photo was taken. And I found myself back at the Grand Canyon and I was a completely different person. I was healthier. I was happier. I had the energy to hike 26 miles in a day, which I could not have done before. Things had changed so dramatically in my life. And it was literally because of that one day when I was on a walk and I realized, oh my God, the problem is I'm not valuing myself. I'm putting everyone else in front of me. And so when I made myself more important, when I finally put myself first, not because I valued other people less, but when I put myself first because I valued my health and my happiness more, everything started to change. And I was able to do this amazing feat that I know that I couldn't have done 4 years ago. So this is just, my hope is that it helps you feel hopeful, and it helps you understand that you can do anything you want to do. You can be as happy and as healthy as you want to be, but you have to start somewhere. And for a lot of us, it's starting with the foundation, and that foundation is self-worth. So I know I've mentioned too, I've made mention of dietary changes, lifestyle changes, testing and whatnot. And I see this a lot. I love this picture because I see this a lot when I first start talking to women about, what it takes to change a life, because what you're doing is you're trying to change your life. And I see a lot of anxiety pop up. People think, oh my God, I can't give up my wine. I can't give up the coffee. I can't give up the gluten. I don't have time. How am I going to find even more time in an already overstretched day? So there's a lot of anxiety that comes up for women, and I 110% get it, because I felt it too. I had to figure it out as well. And now it's my job to help women figure out how to help themselves. And I always tell people it's absolutely possible to feel better. It's absolutely possible to be as happy and healthy and vibrant as you deserve to be, as you want to be. It's my job to figure out an individualized plan just for you that's reasonable, that's realistic, that gets you through the hard times. It's your job to stick with it. But I like to tell women that, listen, I'll take everything, I'll take all the decisions off your plate. We're going to talk about it. We're going to find the best course of action. But what we need, what I need from you is, once we set that plan, is that dedication and the ability to follow it through. So I always try and manage this anxiety, this anxiousness, the moment I see it, because it can be really overwhelming. What do they say? You can't see the forest for the trees. Well, it's my job to see the forest. It's your job to walk through it. So how do I work with patients? I love this image. I took it from Will Craig's website, but he's, and he talks more about the mental health piece, but What I do is I talk about all of it, mental, emotional, physical. And what we have to do is create your individualized map, a map just for you that maps out your healing journey. So we always start with where you are now. We go to where you want to be, and then together we figure out how to get you there. And again, it's my job to figure out the hard parts and make sure that it's a realistic plan. And then it's your job to follow through with it. So what I do is I usually work with women for at least about 6 months. We create a plan that lasts about 6 months, maybe 7, and she goes through that process and comes out a different person on the other side, which is really always amazing to see. So what's next? I have a couple of things I'd love to share with you. You are welcome to schedule a discovery call. A discovery call is a free call. It's a way for us to connect. You can tell me a little bit about what's going on for you. And it's a way for us to figure out, would we be a good fit in working together? How would I help you? And see what's really possible for you. I also, if you'd like to know a little bit more about adrenal fatigue, I have a free adrenal fatigue quiz you can take. And it's really a simple assessment to see where you would fall on the scale of adrenal fatigue, because adrenal fatigue, as I've mentioned, is a process that happens over a long period of time. Symptoms change as hormone levels change, stress hormone levels. And so we want to see how far down the road of adrenal fatigue have you gone. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the share, and you'll see the chat box pop up. And in the chat box, let's see, yeah, in the chat box, you have 2 links there. And the first one is to take the adrenal fatigue quiz. You're welcome to jump over there and do that. It's a really cool assessment, and it's also a way for you to learn a little bit more about yourself and for us to connect. If you would like to talk one-on-one with me, you're welcome to schedule a discovery call. That is the second link in the chat box. So either one of those is open to you. Does anybody have any questions for me at this point? Let's see. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And again, feel free to take me up on the adrenal fatigue quiz. You can also take me up on the discovery call. Both are a great way to learn a little bit more about what's going on for you. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day.